In this video, Jordan Peterson compares the personality traits of people who follow left or right ideologies.
So Colin factor analyzed that very carefully, and what he found in a differentiated factor analysis was that you could take each of the big five and you could break them, weirdly enough, into two. So each of the big five had two. So extroversion had enthusiasm and assertiveness, and then neuroticism had withdrawal and volatility, and actually there's some evidence showing that those actually have different neurological underpinnings. It's quite cool. Agreeableness factors out into politeness and compassion, and liberals are higher on compassion, that's the bleeding heart liberal, and conservatives are higher on politeness. So if you mangle the two together, you don't get any difference in agreeableness between the political dimensions. But if you separate them, then the liberals are compassionate and the conservatives are polite, and we think that politeness may be the more conforming end of agreeableness. So, all right, then openness, this is a good one. Roughly speaking, openness seems to fragment into openness to experience and intellect. And openness to experience predicts whether you're going to take the humanities versus the sciences, and it's the factor that's most strongly associated with artistic creativity and aesthetic sensibility and philosophical ideation and entrepreneurial ability, because entrepreneurs load with the bloody artists, which is pretty hard on your basic conservative capitalists, right? Because they'd rather it wasn't that way. But it does turn out that that's how it works out. And then conscientiousness fragments into industriousness, which we do not understand at all. Really, we just have no idea what that trait is. Like, why do people work hard towards their goals? We can't find a single bloody laboratory task that industrious people do better than non-industrious people, despite the fact that industriousness is an excellent predictor of long-term life outcomes. It's like, what the hell, We can't boil that down to a task in the lab. We've had people do things like count N's, M's, and U's in many, many sentences, eh? It's like, count the U's. Jesus, you'd think that that would be something that an industrious conservative could get right into, But no, there's no effect whatsoever. We can find some things that industrious and conscientious people do worse. So we have lab tasks where they do worse. It's like, that's something, but anyways, it's a great mystery, and I've been trying to crack that for like 6 years with no success at all. We keep getting industrious people to do things, and they seem just as useless as non-industrious people, even though we know that's not true. It's a very good predictor of academic grades, by the way, conscientiousness, and I'm sure it's the industrious component. It's just about as powerful as IQ. Oh yeah, openness, creativity, and IQ. Intellect is roughly IQ, except the intellect measure of it's kind of bad. Because if I ask you how smart you are on a scale from 1 to 7, you'll tell me, and that will correlate with your IQ, but the IQ measure is way more accurate than how smart you think you are. So that's a cool division. That's a very useful division. Okay, but on the conscientious end, we've got orderliness and industrious. Now, it turns out that the conservatives are more orderly than the liberals, not more industrious. Now you think, that's kind of cool, because one of the things you might say about the Germans, for example, is that they're orderly. And you could certainly say that about Hitler, because he was damn orderly. And orderly people, we know conscientiousness is associated with, anti-immigration attitudes and a moral stance against non-normative forms of sexual behavior. But conscientious people also wash their hands more, and their standards of hygiene are better, and they are healthier. So that's kind of interesting. That's an unsettling link, because there's these positive things that are associated with orderliness that are obviously positive, but then there's these other things that seem to be associated with stigmatism and strong in-group, out-group divisions and derogation of the out-group, and all the things that you might see going extraordinarily pathologically in something like genocidal fascism, for example. Now, when I was starting to sort this out, I was reading Hitler's spontaneous talks at the dinner table, which were recorded over about a 3-year period. And one of the things I came to realize was that he didn't really seem afraid of Jews and gypsies. He seemed disgusted by them and contemptuous of them, which is not the same thing. Because disgust, it doesn't load on neuroticism, or not very much. It loads on orderliness. And so that was a weird surprise, because we thought all the damn negative emotions clumped together in neuroticism, and that was that, end of problem. But disgust, which hadn't been studied very much, loads on orderliness. So then we thought, aha, we've got the biological basis of half of conscientiousness. The biological basis is disgust sensitivity. That hasn't been published yet. Okay, so I was thinking about that, and then Hitler washed his hands a lot. He bathed 4 times a day, and he was also a real worshipper of willpower. And orderly people have strong willpower. It's one of the things about anorexic people. You know, anorexics are kind of strange because they tend to be like high-achieving women, fundamentally. They're usually smart, and they're usually very, very dedicated and industrious. But the other thing is they're orderly. And so what seems to happen with, I told you this before, with the anorexics is the disgust system goes off the wires and it's too much. It happens with obsessive compulsive disorder too, which is usually classified as an anxiety disorder, but really doesn't seem to be one. Maybe it's also an anxiety disorder, but mostly what people with OCD hate is to be contaminated. So I had an OCD client once who, she had lost her husband and her children and everything, and she was in the hospital, and she'd actually gone so far as to build like a pseudo airlock on her house so that her children and her husband would have to decontaminate themselves before they entered the house. You know, so, and that was too much for her marriage to sustain. And whenever she was walking down the hall at the hospital and the janitors walked by, she'd flatten herself up against the wall, you know, and then she'd run off and wash her hands. And if you're really, OCD is really out of control, you wash your hands till the skin is raw, basically, or until you run out of soap. Which you try running out of soap when you're using a bar of soap. You have to wash your hands a lot. Or you shower until you run out of hot water. You can't stop. And so you're never clean enough. And I was doing exposure therapy with her, which, you know, means you have to sort of make the person make contact with what they don't want to make contact with. And you do it stepwise, like you just don't throw them into a garbage can, you know. You have to get them to agree to what degree they're willing to expose themselves. And so this is what I could get her to do. If I took a garbage can that was new, and I took a garbage bag that was new, and I put them over there, and I gave her a pool cue, she would touch the new garbage can with the new garbage bag with the pool cue. That was the best she could do. And even then, like I was talking to her, perfectly normal appearing person, you know, in many respects, touch, whack, like she's going to that sink and she's going to wash her hands right now. And you're supposed to do response prevention, which is, well, you don't get to wash your hands. And so that turns out to be a very awkward thing to do in the middle of a psychiatric ward, because I was standing there in the door trying not to let her get to the bathroom, and she was wanting to get to the bathroom, so all the other psychiatric patients came up and, you know, they started accusing me of basically being an authoritarian and interfering with her rights. And so, well, it's a weird thing, eh? Because, you know, was I? She'd given me permission 5 minutes before when she was in a normal state of mind, and now she was retracting it. So who the hell did I have a contract with? And the answer is her now, because you can't sell yourself into slavery, roughly speaking. You don't have that right. So maybe I was interfering with her rights, you know. It's a tricky thing, because, well, she was hospitalized, so obviously something had gone wrong, but, well, anyways, you get the picture. So it gives you an example of how powerful contamination concern can be. Okay.